Hello, my name is Dennis Daly. I'm an interviewer with the Public Library of Cincinnati and Hamilton County. Today is August 9th, 2006, and I am interviewing Mr. Bill Zimmerman at the main library, and our camera operator today is Doug McGee. Hello, Mr. Zimmerman. Thank you very much for doing this. We were chatting a little bit off camera a little earlier about some of your stories during the war and after the war, but could you give us a sense of a little bit of your background before the war and how you came to become part of the military?
Boy, I was a good student in school. I worked for 4 years in high school in a drugstore. I started at $2 an hour and worked up to $2 a day, $2 a week, and I worked up to $8 a week at the end of graduation. My father wanted me to be a druggist, and the druggist convinced me that I should be a chemical engineer. And so I went to chemical engineering school at Wayne University on up through the war. And when the war came along, I signed up, I think it was in January, after December 7th, January the next year, for a competitive tour in the Air Force. And it was to be the duration of the war. And I served, it was an aviation cadet, started out as an aviation student, went to University of Nevada, Reno, Nevada, as well as basic military school, and then on to flying school at primary flying school at Ryan Field in Arizona, where I flew P-22s, which are the low-wing monoplane, Ryan monoplane, radial engine with the elastic wheels up in front. And then I flew in Marana, just north of there, about 20 miles north of Tucson, in basic flying school, both the BT-13 and the AT-6. And the BT-13 was good for instrument flying and night flying, that type of training. And the AT-6 was more of a fighter plane with greater maneuverability and aerobatic ability. And then I went on to Chandler Field, Arizona for advanced flying school, and we were going to be checked out in the RP-322, which was like a P-38 except the engines rotated in the same direction, and they were made in England. And we never got around to it, but I did fly twin-engine airplanes there, and got a lot of real good flying experience. And then went on to Victorville, California, through P-39s for a little short while, then on to Moses Lake, Washington, and flew P-39s for a couple of months there, lost a lot of pilots and a lot of terrible type of adventures. And then went on into P-38 school, learned to fly P-38s, got a lot of experience there. Flew out of Ontario, California at the air base there, which is now a big commercial airport. And finally was sent overseas and went to the Pacific.
Okay. I just had a question real quick. How long between the time you enlisted and the time you got sent overseas, how long was the total? It
was a long time, because what had happened was they got a lot of aviation students in, and then they filled up the flying schools, and their losses over in Europe went down. They didn't have the demand for the replacement so much, and therefore it took us a long time to get overseas. I didn't go overseas until the end of 1944. It was near the end of the war, see, because the war ended, what, in 45, you know, mid-45? And so, but we did have a lot of good experiences along the way.
You had mentioned that you lost some pilots in training.
Yes.
Was that mostly through crashes in training?
It was mostly through crashes. We had one fellow was flying in formation in the P-39, and we kept climbing and climbing and climbing, and everybody was on oxygen. And they told us, watch your little oxygen blinker and make sure that it's continuing to provide you life-giving oxygen, because we're at 15,000, 16,000 feet, and you usually want to have oxygen above 10,000 feet, even in the daylight, and certainly at nighttime above 10,000 feet. And we were climbing away, and they said, hey Bob, you're falling out of formation, get back into formation. Of course, Bob didn't answer, whatever the name of the fellow was. And they kept calling to him and calling to him, and he just kept climbing away. And the rest of he says, well, we can't keep on climbing like this. We're running short on gas. We got to get back to the field. We all got to go back to the field. And one aircraft kept on going and climbing and climbing and climbing, and he had passed out from lack of oxygen. His blinker was not giving him oxygen, or showing that he was getting oxygen, and so he crashed. But we had gunnery crashes there where our guys were shooting at ground targets and crashed into the ground, and loss of many lives. We had a very interesting thing. We were at Moses Lake, Washington, and the planes were all grouped in a parking array in a place where they parked, and it took so long to get out to the ends of the 10,000-foot runways that the engines would overheat. And so they said, well, let's take off right parallel to the parking strip, and then if it gets real hot, drop over the edge of Moses Lake. And so we would see the fellows take off and go over the edge of Moses Lake and disappear, and we were waiting for them to climb back out and see, oh, he's safe, he's on his way. And they had sea patrols down there on the lake in motorboats to rescue anybody that went in. And I don't know that anybody ever did, but it was a concern.
So there were some bad times during training, but there were probably a lot of good times too. Do you have anything that really stick out in your mind, the characters or anything like that?
Lots of good friends. I was with a group of Mormon boys, and they were just absolutely remarkable. I chatted with you earlier about the real honest, honorable fellow in Ontario, California, who when we were flying P-38s at night over Ontario, the operations officer, a major, said, all ships flying out of Ontario, land your P-38 immediately. Somebody has been buzzing the town of Ontario. And what do you know? He lined us all up and said, I want the officer and gentleman who did the buzzing of Ontario to step right forward and admit that he was the one that did it. Well, the young fellow who was the Mormon boy, after a few moments of standing there, everybody hushed and still, nobody having the courage to step forward, he took a brilliant step forward and saluted and, sir, Lieutenant C.P. Rudd reporting, sir, I want you to know that clearly that it was not I. It was not I that flew and buzzed the city of Ontario. So we had a lot of great experiences. I think reading the book is the big thing, and reliving it, just being there and going through the kinds of circumstances that I went through and saying, hey, was that what it was like, would be the real great thing.
Yeah. So then you shipped off to the Pacific.
Yes, went over through Hawaii and stayed a couple of days right in Hawaii, where the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor, and saw a little bit of Hawaii for a day or two, and then we had one stop on the way across the Pacific at some small island, and wound up in New Guinea, the place where they first, well, I can't remember the name, small island, and we had some green eggs. They were cooking scrambled eggs, and they were green in color, and we thought, my gosh, this is terrible.
Did you try them?
Yeah. Oh, they were all right.
Okay.
Then we went on to Nadzab, which is a place in New Guinea, and we stayed there, and there were natives that were coming through the tent area with their long spears in hand, and at first we were worried about them, then we realized, hey, there's an awful lot of us with pistols, and there's very few. interesting experiment. Flew a mission out of Nadzab in New Guinea, right south of Leyte, maybe 40 miles south of Leyte, New Guinea, and we took off in a P-47. We learned how to fly P-47s down there, and we went to the end of the runway, and we just barely got into the air, and we were buzzing along over the tall grass and slowly climbing out, and it took us forever to get to where we were going. And then we dropped, we were carrying a 165-gallon fuel tank filled with napalm, and we dropped that on Wewak. And the Japanese at Wewak were pretty well surrounded and didn't put up much resistance. And it was quite an experience to see the bombs go off. So,
that's interesting. I didn't know that napalm was used in it.
Oh yeah, we bombed Borneo with napalm also. It was very effective because it burned like crazy.
Mm-hmm. I was familiar with it in Vietnam, but did you stay generally in one place, or were you moving around a whole lot?
We moved we went first of all to MacArthur had just been through Leyte Gulf maybe a month or so before we got there. We got in at night, and the Japanese were bombing the ships out in the harbor at night, and we had a fire there. We put the fire out right away, and we had some interesting experiences there, just to say, hey, how do we protect ourselves when we were right new to a war zone, and here we are right in the place where they would like to bomb the heck out of us. And then we went on to Lingayen Gulf, which is up in Luzon on the west side, and there was an instance there where we were watching a movie one evening, and as we sat and watched the big silver screen and out in the open, and a P-61 night fighter had been patrolling in the area and circling around, and it came over the runway and with its navigation lights on and ready to make a circle and come in and land. There was a Japanese plane behind it on its tail, and it didn't know because its radar all points to the front. And pretty soon we hear bombs blowing up on the runway 3 or 4 miles. We were on the far end of the runway, you know, and so we all started running, and of course the projector went out, but our thought was that this Japanese airplane that's just bombing the thing is going to strafe the whole area where all these people must be on the ground watching the movie. So that kind of scared us quite a bit. And of course the Japanese plane, it turned, went out over the Gulf, Lingayen Gulf, and the water down low, and proceeded on its way. In the meantime, the American aircraft were shooting at the navigation lights of the P-61 as they saw it go by. So
did they hit the?
No, they didn't. They didn't hit the P-61, but it was a worrisome kind of situation. So it's that kind of stuff.
What kind of planes did you fly? Were you more a fighter pilot, or?
I was a fighter pilot.
Okay.
But then after the war, I got into other things. You know, I flew one trip to Alaska after the war when I got finally a station. Went on this competitive tour that I talked with you a little bit about, and decided I didn't want to be a regular Air Force officer in the flying aspect of it. I wanted to be in the technical aspect because after the war I'd gotten a degree in chemical engineering, and I had said, well, I want to go back in and do something technical. And I had a chance to get at Wright Field in the power plant laboratory, and I was there in that laboratory for maybe 6 months or so, and going around various universities, Alfred University, Armor Research Foundation, Battelle Memorial, Ohio State, and University of Illinois, and I got to know those people. And so when I got out of I finished my 2-year tour of duty, in the laboratory there at Wright Field. I went around to different places trying to get a job, and I thought, well, a good place to work might be in one of those places that we had been supervising their contract work in ceramics. And so I got an advanced degree, a master's degree in ceramic engineering at the University of Illinois. I worked there for maybe 2.5, 3 years. And in the meantime, I've been married, had a child, and so on.
Back to the war just for a minute here. I know that the title of your book is Mayday, Mayday, I'm on Fire. Could you talk about that story? If you'd like to?
Okay. This was in basic flying school, and I had been flying an airplane and out of Marana, which is just north of Tucson, Arizona. It was an AT-6, and a sliding glass canopy, and a radial engine, low wing airplane. I was flying and doing some slow rolls and lazy eights and different types of maneuvers, and doing some spins. All of a sudden I came out of the spin, and I couldn't get the throttle open. As you come out of the spin, you stabilize, you're going into a dive, and everything is under control, and you're controlling the plane pretty well. You're starting to pull out, and you want to give it the throttle, and the throttle wouldn't open. But in the meantime, I had noticed that as I was trying to get the throttle open, there was a yellow flame coming out of the wrong side of the airplane. Ordinarily, the exhaust comes out on the right-hand side, and it's kind of bluish. And this was a yellow flame, and it was gasoline burning there. And so I later figured out what had happened was that in throttling back somehow, the gasoline had overflowed the carburetor and was burning on the carburetor side of the engine, on the intake side of the engine. And so I called out, Mayday, Mayday, I'm on fire, I'm bailing out. And I stood up in the cockpit, slid the cockpit canopy back. I didn't even bother, I unbuckled my seatbelt, I didn't even bother to unhook my oxygen mask or my earphones or anything. And they said, ship calling Marana Air Base, please identify yourself and say where you're at. So I sat back down again, and I was gliding the airplane. And in the meantime, the yellow fire stopped. But here I am. Here's the big saguaro cactuses on the ground, and I'm going to hit one of these things, with big tree trunks with all kinds of spines in them. And I was very much concerned. I still had, plenty of altitude, but the field was a long way away, and I was gliding towards the field. And finally, after the fire went out, evidently the throttle plate on the throttle cooled off and contracted enough so that you could open it. And so the engine roared to life, and instead of doing the intelligent thing and flying around the field and trying to come in a normal pattern, I landed the best way I could, right straight into the field on a crosswind, and made a safe landing. I was very nervous, but the local guys there who were monitoring the landing of planes in just a temporary radio station in one of the other AT-6s, they encouraged me to walk around a bit, and finally got home all right.
Yeah,
but
no damage.
experience. That was the highlight of my book, as far as
could have been the low light of your experience, but it worked out well. We've talked to a number of veterans already in the Pacific, and one of the things that generally they'll talk about and have a very strong memory of is where they were when they heard about the atomic bomb drops.
The atomic bomb.
Do you remember where you were?
Yeah, in fact, we had been ferrying P-38s from Wewak Island down near the Solomons, or near New Guinea, an island on the north shore of New Guinea and the west end of New Guinea, where the ships came in and they unloaded these P-38s, and then they took them on board the land, and they fixed them up and got them to engines to run propellers on and so on, whatever they did. And then we would ferry them, and we ferried them first of all to Zamboanga, Mindoro, which was on the south end of the Philippines, where our base was. And then we stayed one night at our base, and the next night we flew them from Zamboanga up to Clark Field. And we parked them at Clark Field, getting ready for the huge expectation of a landing in Japan, or at least a fight in Japan, aerial fight in Japan. And there were all kinds of aircraft there, B-25s, B-24s, other things that were being built up. The supply was being built up for the eventual attack upon Japan, and that was probably about June or May or June, I suppose, of 1945, and before they had dropped the A-bombs, before they had actually dropped the A-bombs. And the thing was that I was on patrol, flying over Leyte Gulf in a P-38 that I had flown up from Zamboanga up to Leyte, flying at maybe 22,000, 23,000 feet during the daytime, to make sure that if anybody was coming in, at least we would have some high altitude support to take care of any possible enemy activity there. Although the Japanese were pretty well defeated, and they were mainly kamikaze type actions. And while I was there, the atom bombs were dropped, and of course the Japanese made a surrender, and our guys were all delighted down in Zamboanga, and we had a whiskey ration that got an ounce of whiskey for every time you flew a mission, and they charged it up, and so you might have a quart of whiskey or something left. Well, the guys drank all the whiskey, and they had a big party. They had a big party while I was off away from base. Yeah.
So you got back to return fine.
I got back fine, but I didn't mind losing out on the whiskey. I was really glad to have the war over.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that's now. Did you ever witness any kamikaze attacks?
Did I ever witness what?
Any kamikaze attacks?
Not personally,
Okay.
no. I had witnessed them at night, where we were, say, on Mindanao, on Palawan, and our tents were right along the seashore, and the airstrip would run past the edges of our tents, or the north side, south side of our tents, inland, and so that the American planes could come in and land. And sometimes they would have a single plane come over at night, and it would bomb the airstrip. And as long as we stayed in our own area, away from the airstrip, and hugged the shoreline, we would be safe. But you worried for fear that planes coming in from the sea might strafe the shoreline at night, and what could you do? So we saw that aspect of it.
Something comes to mind as you're talking. I don't know. Have you ever read Catch-22?
Who?
Catch-22, the book Catch-22?
I don't think so.
Okay, it was a fictional book written about the theater you were in. They were pilots, and I was going to see if you had any sort of thoughts on that book. If you hadn't read it, then.
No.
So you were in the Philippines when the war ended, flying around the Philippines, and then what kind of process was it for you to get back to the States?
Long, slow process, because they were in no hurry. They wanted to get the men back. There were so many men over there to bring back. We flew over in airplanes, because we were being sent over there to replace men that deserved to be sent back. They had shot down other enemy airplanes, and some of them had been killed by fighting with Japanese airplanes. And by the time we got over there, we were pretty much in control of everything, and there was not so much danger from the enemy as there was from actually flying the planes over water and having circumstances cause hazards. So it took a long time for them to get the men together and say who's been here the longest, put them on a boat and let them spend 43 days or whatever length of time it took for those boats to come back to San Francisco. And when we landed in San Francisco, we thought, wonderful, we know San Francisco. When we go underneath the Golden Gate Bridge and we're going to land at this wharf, why, they'll let us go and we can go into San Francisco and go all around and have a great time, you know. Well, then we marched across the landing wharf to another ferry boat, and they took us 35 miles up some narrow river to a processing plant, and we never did get to spend any time in San Francisco, even though we had, you know, when we were waiting to go overseas.
So you got processed, you got home, and were you married when you went into the service?
No.
So you got married soon after, or?
No, I started back to school, and I went a short while to school, and then it was in January of 46, January 46. I got home and I started back into school in 1945, and started back into my classes. In January 46, there were 3 of us fellows who were coming home from school one evening by buses, and we went to the place where you were to exchange, transfer between one set of buses to another. And the 2 of us said, well, we have no date for the engineers' ball 2 weeks from this coming Friday. And so we said, well, one fellow says, well, I says, I'm all set for the engineers' ball, and I've got a good girl that's going to go with me and dance. He says, you 2 guys need dates. I know in my history class 2 girls, and they're standing over there in the safety zone waiting for a streetcar right now to take them out Grand River Avenue. So let's go over there and talk with them. So we went over there and we talked with them, and the other fellow was shorter than me, so he took the short girl and I took the tall girl, and we went out dancing. They agreed that they would like to do that, and so they said, well, let's go practice dancing. So we went practicing dancing for one night, and then after that it was a good deal all the way around. And I married the tall girl.
Married the tall girl, married your date, yes, which I met her earlier. And something that came to mind when we were talking about that story, what kind of adjustment was it for you to be back in, generally in civilian life, but to go back to school after you had been in combat for a year?
It wasn't bad at all, because you became engrossed in doing the studies that were necessary to complete your degree. Mm-hmm. You had worked on the degree as long as you could, waiting the Air Force to call you. When the Air Force called you, you went, did the Air Force thing, and then when you got back, the government paid for your way so that you could go back to school. And while you were going back to school, you met your wife or what have you, and you enjoyed the thing very much, and it was an easy transition. After college education was completed, I went to work for a short period for a local company that was intending to sell, or did sell, petroleum solvents for paint companies and different things around town. And I did that for a short while, and then I was recalled on the competitive tour business, trying to get a regular commission in the Air Force. And then after we were shipped off to, my wife and I were shipped off to Long Island, and were there for a while in a operational system where they had men who were trying to be competitively becoming flying lieutenants in the regular Air Force. we decided that we would take the situation where I would work at Wright Field. And so I transferred to Wright Field as a lieutenant and worked for a technical gentleman there in doing the work that involved administering Air Force contracts with universities and research institutions in the areas of high-temperature materials. So I became a high-temperature materials specialist, and at the end of the termination of my 2 years competitive tour service, I was released and went into the University of Illinois working on a project there. And since I was working on the project, when the Korean War came along, and they asked me, hey, you've got to come up for service in the Korean War, they managed to get me a deferment because I was working on a government contract that was very much needed. And so luckily I didn't go back into the military.
You talk about the competitive program that you got into in the Air Force the second time. Could you expand a little bit more on what that entailed?
Well, the Air Force had designed after the war a 2-year competitive tour program for those who wanted to return to the Air Force and gain a regular Air Force commission and become permanent military service officers. And I thought, well, gee, that wouldn't be a bad idea to do. So I went in with my wife, and one day, while my wife was working with a local repair affiliate that took care of televisions that were damaged, she was listening to the radio in the office, and she heard that one of the pilots at Mitchell Field flying P-61s came in and made a crash landing as he was attempting to land. And so my wife was very concerned. Hey, my husband works there, flies P-61s out there. And meantime, I'd been walking around the base. The first thing I did when I went into the operations room and heard that a gentleman, lieutenant, had crashed his P-61 and lost his life trying to land in the field, I thought, I better get in touch with my wife and let her know at the TV repair station, in case she heard the news over the TV, that it wasn't I that had died. So after that, we started to think in terms of how do we move to some other type of activity. So that's how I managed to get out.
Okay. Never thought for commercial flying?
Never. I figured there were so many men who had 400, 500 hours of flying B-24s and B-25s and so on that I wouldn't stand any chance in getting commercial possibilities. Although I did fly during the time that I was at Wright Field, I did fly C-47s for a while and flew them to Alaska. So I took some men from the power plant laboratory where I was engaged in technical work. Mm-hmm. I flew as a pilot to take the men who worked in the power plant laboratory to their stations in Alaska, where they were doing winter testing of engines and things, to take them up during the summertime where they were going to change their conditions over to winter operations for testing. So two of us flew them in all the way up to Alaska from Wright Field. It took us 2 days, 1 day to get us to the U.S.-Canadian border, and the second day we flew all the way up through Canada to Seward, Alaska, beyond Seward. And then we took a float plane out to a small place where they had a fishing camp, and we fished there for several days before we came home.
Had a good trip out?
Yeah.
Do you still fly?
No.
How long has it been since you've been?
Ever since I got out of the Air Force, I had no further flying, and I haven't really missed it, in terms of wanting to go back. Had a great set of experiences, and I'm satisfied.
Did you ever get a chance to fly jets, or was it all?
It was all. I flew F-82s, which was the twin Mustang, and I went up with one flight in that with another gentleman, and he took me to fly a loop. And we went vertical, and he couldn't get it over on his back. And as we were going vertical, the dust filled the cockpit, our hands floated around, and we thought the thing will never turn over and start heading downward. And finally it fell off to one side and headed downward, and the gentleman that was flying the ship on the other cockpit and the other side of the aircraft, he, twin boom Mustang, F-83. He finally got it straightened and we came on in, but that was the end of that.
When you look back at the war, generally, I've had talked to veterans and heard veteran stories. Well, there'll be some who say it was a wonderful experience. It was something that really taught them good lessons in life, and some that didn't have such good experiences. What are your general thoughts of the war and what role it played in your life in general?
I think it played a good role in my life and gave me lots of opportunities that I'm glad that I had not missed out on. I enjoyed it very much. There were some scary times, but there were some very satisfying times too.
Do you ever see your comrades, men that you knew over there still? Do you keep in touch with them? Or?
No, there's only, I knew some Mormon boys, and I had a real great friend that I wanted to keep in touch with. And so I tried to call him in Salt Lake City, and through the director, and I couldn't get hold of him. And so I called the next one, the one who stepped forward, and said, I'm Lieutenant C.P. Rudd, and he was a Mormon boy too. And so I said, do you know where my other friend is? And he said, no, he says, I don't, but I talked with him. And I had some other friends that have moved on and gone to different places, never able to find them again.
Sure.
Times change.
Sure, absolutely. Well, sir, can you think of anything else you'd like to talk about, or?
I could think of 100 things.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It's an honor to speak
it.
with you. And we appreciate Mr. Zimmerman has donated a copy of his book to the library, which will be available here soon. We appreciate everything, and thank you so much for the opportunity.